Welcome to the Author Alchemist podcast, where I talk about mindset, process, and productivity for writers. My name is Kimbu York, and I have years of experience as a fan fiction writer, a professionally published author, and a productivity coach. This is a judgment-free zone for writers of all genres, abilities, and skill levels, where I focus on the hard part, sitting down to write. Hey, good morning, y'all. It's Coffee with Kimbu Extended Edition. Hey, my Black Cat mug, which is also known as my podcast, The Author Alchemist, where we talk about mindset, process, and productivity. Today, I'm going to be talking about a confluence of social media posts. One of them, and I'll link or have the images to them, whatever. I'll link to them in the show notes. The first one was funny and was shared by Pia, who is another subscription author who does long-running serials. She got her start on Tumblr, and we really vibe. We get along great as far as like our own approach and the work that we love and our backgrounds. She posted a meme about world building, and it's like there's two types of world builders. They're the ones that are very, very concerned about details, like, when was steel invented and what's the history of domesticated chickens and when were horseshoes invented. And that's the first kind. The second kind is the person who's just like, it's all make believe, I don't care what happens. I am the first kind. By far, I am the first kind. My best friend Kim McShane, also known as Kim Provides, laughs at me a lot about Thursday, because when I was writing Wolves of Harmony Heights, I was writing about the mother of a child who was in early high school. And so I needed to know what the school calendar was. And because I was writing about werewolves, I felt I needed to know what the lunar calendar was. When was the full moon? And so I had to pick a year. I think I set it in 2012. I had to look at the calendar. When was the full moon? And then figure out when was homecoming, when was prom, when are these things happening? And because I didn't even go to school, I'm homeschooled, I had no familiarity with this. I was getting things all mixed up. So I had this map of dates and times and calendars, and Kim was just howling, and she was like, what does it matter if, the first werewolf shows up on a Thursday? Does it matter at all? And of course, yes, it matters so much. Because for me, it does. And also, I know fangirls, I know fandom in general, and people love to nitpick those types of points, right? They love to know, the weights and the measures and the dates and how old was this character when this one. And, for those of us who love shows like Stargate Atlantis, or Supernatural's another one, which just has no consistency, has no follow through. It's just ridiculous how klutzy the consistency is in those shows. There's just none, really. For characters or for places, times, things, it's just a mess. It allows a lot of room to make things up. So I often want to be the second kind who's just like, it's Thursday, it's Friday, who cares? They go to sleep on Tuesday and they wake up on a the following Monday. It doesn't matter. People will fill in the blanks. And the thing is, readers will fill in the blanks. But as the writer, I can't fill in the blank. I need to know. If they go to bed on Tuesday and they don't wake up until the following minute, what happened? Were they in the fairy realm? What's going on here? I need to know. So it's a me thing. It's definitely a me thing. But I would love to be the kind of author who could just hand wave over everything and go about my days in peace. And I am not that author. So, but that led to the second social media post, which I'm going to talk about, which is one that was on Tumblr. And it talks about, hold on, I'm going to cheat for a second to look off to my notes. John Rogers, co-creator and executive producer of Leverage. I was not a fan of Leverage. I'm not big on the heist. No, not heist. I'm not big on that kind of grifting, scheming type of show that Leverage is. Love the characters, what I've seen of some of the scenes, they look great. As a person who loves polyamorous triad love relationships, I think it's Elliot and Parker and the other guy. I don't. Who's who? Is is Parker the black guy? I don't know. I don't know. Clearly, I'm not a fan of the show. So, no idea who anybody is. Elliot's the short guy, I think. So, anyway, Nate is the organizer. Why am I going into details? It doesn't matter. Because, as John Rogers was saying, it's important to leave holes in the narrative. Why is it important to leave holes in the narrative? I mean, because that just goes against my grain, really. Well, if you look at it from the other side of the mirror, holes in the narrative lets fans and readers and followers and fan fiction writers fill in those blanks themselves. There is a lot of push in our community for writers to do, character sheets and background stories and summaries and all this sort of stuff to get into the nitty-gritty details of their characters. But if you do all that work, then you're not leaving a lot of room for your readers' imaginations. And I think that's a very important element to remember. Because you're not just there to tell a story. You're there to incite the imagination and the creativity of your readers. They may not be fan fiction writers. They may not produce anything related to their hobby. Maybe they just love going to the movies. Maybe they just love reading books. But yet, in their brains and their minds, they're still like creating these scenarios and imagining it and thinking about it. And I think you don't have to go much farther than the Star Wars fandom for looking for fans who may not be into cosplay, may not be into fan fiction, may not be into any kind of fan art or anything like that, and yet they are so into the history and the universe itself. Like they know all the details. We all know those Star Wars fans who just know every side character in every movie and what starship they flew and what planet they were from. And that's great. But that's also been built up over years and years and years. I was there. I was there, people. The dawn of time. I was a 8-ish-year-old child when the original Star Wars A New Hope landed in theaters in 1977. And I remember sitting in the theater watching Tatooine come up on the screen over our seats. You know, it was rising and rising and rising. And then the starship came through. And it's just like my little tiny brain went poof, because I just started imagining so much about that planet. It's so much about, and the story explained so much of it further on, and yet not really. There were still so many holes in the Star Wars narrative. There continued to be holes in the Star Wars narrative, and I'm not going to even dig down into that deep morass of a pit. But in the first 10 to 15 years of Star Wars existence as a cultural institution, there was a lot of creativity around who the characters were, where they came from, how they were related, if they were related. Even after, Return of the Jedi came in and just as every movie expanded the universe, it seemed to just create more questions, right? And that was wonderful. For me, as a fangirl, I could just imagine so many possibilities, and it was just fantastic. I think as I got older, and as, if you know me, you know the story, I eventually left fandom behind because I was a grown-up and I was going to college, and I wasn't gonna entertain those childish fancies. I wasn't gonna do that. I spent 20 years without fandom, and it was a mistake. But one of the things that did not endear me to fandom as I got older was this idea of having to know everything. It infected my writing too, because you look at the look at Dune. So I was never into Lord of the Rings, the Silmarillion. I didn't even know that existed for the longest of times. I just wasn't there. I was much more a science fiction girly, and so for me it was Dune. And I remember buying the Dune encyclopedia and just being mesmerized by it. Like, oh, people are just creating whole worlds. And then it started weighing me down. Look at how much work they put into it. Look how they thought about it. Look how much, the history that was this being parsed out in these amazing space opera epic stories that I was reading. And certainly it was the trend of the time. It eventually, I think waxed and waned over the years. Fantasy's always had a little bit of that because of Tolkien. There have been times when people just didn't really want that kind of in-depth fictional storytelling, and there are people who don't like it ever for any reason, and that's fine. But for me, knowing that there were fans out there who wanted that type of thing, fans like me who loved it, just became a weight on my shoulders. It was not cool, y'all, because I was thinking, do I have to write a dictionary first? Like, do I need to do that first before I start writing the story? That seems a little muchish. And the answer is no. Of course you don't. You don't have to do that. You don't have to do any of that. You could just sit down and start writing a story if you wanted. And of course, me being a pantser, that's pretty much how I write all my stories. But even if you're an outliner, a planner, whatever process that you use, if you are sitting down to tell the story, you don't have to think about all of that first. I just want to take the pressure off of you. If you are the first kind of fantasy writer or world building writer who has to know everything in detail, and before you even sit down, like the history of horseshoes, which I focus on because that's one of the things I remember researching for one of my fantasy stories years and years and years ago. Like, who started the horseshoe thing and why and where did, it's just not something that comes up in normal conversation, at least not normal conversation for people who aren't, working with horses every day. So I would get bogged down by those details, and they just weren't necessary. You could leave blank spaces. You could leave 3 asterisks in the space and say, I need to come back to this and double check my math. Or just not include the numbers at all. I've seen that argument as well. Just don't do numbers. Don't do weights and measures. Don't do dates. 50 years before the emperor was born. Well, what was that date on that again? Well, maybe won't mention it. The calendar is a variable, and it's one of the more interesting takes I've seen on this is, of course, my favorite book of all time at this point in my life is Victoria Goddard's Hands of the Emperor, where there is an event that happened. I'm trying not to be spoilery here. In the past, this is backstory. There was this magical time flux event, and it was pretty catastrophic. It's not explained at all in that first book. You get more of it in the second book, but in that particular book, it's just a thing that happened, and you get the feeling as information is slowly dribbled down to you through the course of the story that it involved time somehow. And so how old is Kip, the main character? Well, he's either around 35 or 300 to 500 years old. It's really hard to tell. You just don't know. Nobody else knows. Kip doesn't really know himself because it's all timey-wimey. And I thought that was really a way of getting around it. And of course, it's a specific event that happened in that world, and it's all about the world building. And, you just can't do that on a random Tuesday at your local high school if you're writing contemporary romance or something like that. But I do want to stress that there's flexibility there. You don't have to get hung up on whether it's Thursday. If it's important to your characters and to the world building that it's a day of the week, that might be enough. That might be enough. For me, I had to know when prom was. Prom, homecoming. I had to know those two. I had to know what time frame those happened in, and by that I mean which season they happened. Was it fall? Is it spring? I got a little carried away with the nitty gritty details. If you read the book, you may not even notice it, but I do because I still have the calendar documents that I made to try to figure out what was happening when. Maybe you need that when you're writing it, but don't feel like you have to put all of that information into the story itself. This is make-believe worlds. And even if you're writing historical fiction, even if you're writing, something based, contemporary romance, if you're writing something that's very based on the world now as we know it, or if you're trying to write something that happened 50 years after a historical event, it's good to know the dates. It's good to know the weights and measures, the times, the way people talked, because that can add I'm going to say this wrong, verisimilitude, reality to the story that you're telling. In the Chinese fandom, Chinese drama fandom particularly that I'm in, so for instance, I read a lot of fan fiction based on Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, Nirvana Empire, and stories like that. And there is a traditional Chinese measurement called li. And a li is not a mile. And I'm honestly not sure how long a li is, but there is a certain element of world building where I will include that word instead of using miles, simply because I'm trying to create this atmosphere that it is this particular culture in this particular time. And I'm not doing it because it's exotic and wild and interesting and new, which is a very racist way to look at it, but because I want to build in that world a certain feeling of authenticity. Same reason that I will sometimes, in some of my fan fiction that I'm working on right now for the Untamed Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, I will sometimes use the word mother, and sometimes I will use the word Mushin, thank you. I will also use madam to indicate the wife of the sect leader, and other times I will use the in-world term Furen. And I do that because I want to suggest layers of formality, right? Like people who might be friendly with her might use a casual register, whereas people in a more formal situation would use a more formal register. In English, there's no registers. There's nothing like that. There's ways to make your language a bit more formal. You're not using contractions as much. You're being careful about pronunciation. You might have a certain, East Coast, Midwestern accent in certain settings, but we don't have formal and informal registers in the way many Asian languages do, and certainly is true for Chinese, Mandarin in this specific case. So I want to try to create that sense of reality to those stories, both out of respect to the culture and the traditions, but also for the readers to be immersed into those stories. Those are valid reasons to get deep into world building, but sometimes you don't need to know the technological development of horseshoes. Like if you have farriers, if you have blacksmithers in your world, then horseshoes are there. They're there. They're a thing. You don't have to explain who invented horseshoes or what culture they came from. If this is a second world fantasy series, not based on, it's just not set in any country on Earth, any time span on Earth with humans that we know of, then do you really need to explain it? Probably not. You might need to know it for your own sense of mind. What level of technological advancement are they at? And if one of your characters is a farrier and is doing horseshoeing, yeah, you need to know a little bit more about that to create the reality for your readers. In the same way in Wolves of Harmony Heights, if it's urban, paranormal, witches, werewolves. But if I had said that the kids were getting on the school bus on a Saturday morning, everybody would be like, "What? Are they going on a field trip? What's going on? Like, why are they catching a bus on Saturday morning? That makes no sense." You have to create the world that fits the world that you're writing in for your readers. In other words, I guess the focus I'm trying to get here is to drag you away from being weighed down by the thought you have to have all the details right and think more about your readers. Like John Rogers was saying, he keeps holes purposefully in plots and in character backstory and in all sorts of elements of the show so that that viewers could fill it in, fans could fill it in. Fan fiction writers could build up a background for Elliot because that is a character that they love, right? So they could do that. He did not worry about it too much. And yet it's a beloved show. Everybody loves it. Nobody's sitting around complaining about, oh, he got this. No, that museum doesn't actually have that particular security set up. I mean, I'm sure somebody is, but like they're the minority. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk to you about this week, because I think part of mindset and part of process is, yes, we're always going to end up going down those rabbit holes. It's kind of part of the fun, really. Like I really enjoyed learning about the history of horseshoes. Was it really necessary? Did I need to feel stressed out about it? Did I need to feel like I needed to include what I found out into the story? All of that, the answer is no. If you want to do the research so that you feel comfortable writing it, that's one thing. If you want to do the research so that your readers have an immersive, realistic experience when they read the story, that's another thing. If you're doing it because you feel like you have to and it's a drag and you think that's the rules, that is not required. It's not necessary. Don't even bother. Go write. Go get some writing done, y'all. I am still working on my coffee. I've got a meeting that I'm going to later today, so I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you guys have a great week and get everything done that you need to get done. And I guess I'm going to go do some writing too. Take care, y'all. That's a wrap on another episode of the Author Alchemist Podcast. I'm Kimbu York, and you can find all of my books, blogs, and other projects at houseofyork.info. All one word, House of York, no spaces, .info. Thanks for dropping by.